Hey, we're going to talk about one of the most important Supreme Court cases in U.S. history. It actually dramatically gives a lot of power to the United States Supreme Court because as the founders were sort of drafting the Constitution, they got everything else done, and they almost the court system, the judiciary branch, was almost an afterthought. I mean, they really. I've heard another historian kind of describe it as they got to that part and they just sort of wrote in, "We'll draft this later," because the court system is very unfinished, and so when Jefferson Jefferson is elected president in 1800, well, there's a couple of months, and you guys have seen this. There's a couple of months between an election and the new president taking office. And so Jefferson's elected in 1800, and he's a Democratic Republican. No relation to current Democrats or Republicans, completely different political animal. But Jefferson's elected in 1800, and he's a Democratic Republican. And so the outgoing administration with John Adams are a bunch of Federalists. And the Congress is controlled by Federalists, and they are losing power in Jefferson's supposed revolution of 1800. Well, they're very concerned. They're incredibly concerned about what they perceive as a terrible direction for the country with these new crazy Democratic Republicans coming in. And so they do what they can to sort of safeguard everything that they've done. And one of the things that they do is that they draft very quickly the Judiciary Act of 1801. And this law creates a whole bunch of new judge positions. And so what they're going to do, and you may have heard this term over the last couple of election cycles, they're going to try to stack the courts. They're going to create a whole bunch of new judge positions, and they're going to staff these positions with loyal Federalists. And that way, if these Democratic Republicans pass a bunch of laws, we've got people in judicial spots that can maybe thwart all of these new Democratic Republican laws. And so that's what they do. And you've heard this part probably at some point. And so they draft this Judiciary Act of 1801, creates a whole bunch of new judge positions. And right before the day to where Jefferson is going to be sworn in the next day, the Congress and the Adams White House are just scrambling. Adams is nominating any Federalists, that he can kind of think of for new judge spots. And they're sending fresh horses, riders with fresh horses from, the presidential mansion to Congress. The Congress is approving those judge positions, and then they go to the Secretary of State's office, and then the Secretary of State sends those appointments out. And they are, like I said, they are down to the wire, so much so that there are a number of so-called midnight appointments that, it's 11:50, and the last handful of appointments comes in to the Secretary of Treasury's office, and the outgoing Secretary of the Treasury does not have time to deliver them. And so that Secretary of the Treasury leaves them on the desk under the assumption that, hey, these have been filed, these appointments have been cleared by Congress, this is a go. And the next morning, the assumption is James Madison, the new Secretary of State, will come in and he'll deliver these appointments because it's his job to deliver the appointments. Sorry. So one of those appointments is to a gentleman named William Marbury. And Marbury has been appointed to be the Justice of the Peace for Washington, D.C. And his letter of appointment stays on the desk. The next morning, new incoming Secretary of the Treasury, James Madison, elects not to deliver those. And his argument is that it's my option to deliver these or not. And so Madison opts to not. So Marbury sues. Okay. Now, according to the Judiciary Act of 1801, if something like this happens, you are first, and especially because this is Washington, D.C., your first stop is the United States Supreme Court. You go to the Supreme Court, you file what is called a writ of mandamus. It's an order by the court, and then you'll get your spot if the court agrees with you. And so Marbury files a writ of mandamus, files it with the United States Supreme Court because that's what the Judiciary Law Act of 1801 tells him to do. And it gets to the Supreme Court. Now, there's a lot of politics in this. The Chief Justice of the court is a guy named John Marshall. He's a Federalist. He doesn't want to start out on the wrong foot with Thomas Jefferson, who is a Democratic Republican. So we really kind of want to, there's some political considerations in this. And we're not really going to deep dive into that. But John Marshall and the rest of the court look at this. And okay, it says, he's supposed to get this appointment, but the technical side of this is more problematic. So Judiciary Act of 1801 says your first stop is to go file with the Supreme Court. Cool. However, the Constitution of the United States says the United States Supreme Court is the final stop on any kind of thing. You never start your case at the United States Supreme Court. That's the final court of appeals. And so you don't start there. And so this law, Judiciary Act of 1801, conflicts with the United States Constitution. And so the Supreme Court says that a Judiciary Act is unconstitutional. And so a really, really big thing. They have just basically sidestepped the whole issue. We are not deciding Marbury versus Madison. We're not deciding Mr. Marbury's case that he should be appointed to Justice of the Peace for Washington, D.C. We are, however, saying that law that told him to stop first at the Supreme Court, that law is actually unconstitutional. And so the courts kind of, they legally did the correct thing because this law is unconstitutional, but they're also at the same time sidestepping this so that they're not, first case out of the gate with Thomas Jefferson is not something that challenges Thomas Jefferson. So there's some politics a little bit in there. A big thing though, holy cow. They've established the concept of judicial review. In deciding this case, and this is kind of wild because this is not in the Constitution, in deciding this case, they have given themselves the power, because they didn't have it before. It doesn't say in the Constitution if the Supreme Court can declare a law unconstitutional or not. But in deciding this case and saying that a judicial act is unconstitutional, the Supreme Court has given themselves the power to declare laws unconstitutional. And so it's this very weird kind of loophole on loophole sort of a thing. And so they've established the concept of judicial review. They have decided a law is unconstitutional and given themselves the power to declare future laws unconstitutional. And that's honestly, that's a lot of what the court does, is they decide whether laws are unconstitutional or not, the United States Supreme Court. And so Marbury versus Madison very, very much dramatically increases the power of the United States Supreme Court. and that's a very neat kind of way that kind of came about. So that's that case. We'll talk about some more cases next time. See you later.